Author Kevin Major may have written the definitive book about teenagers, but the only way you're ever going to find out about teenagers is to ask the teenagers themselves. Back in the bunny-hoppin' 50s, life seemed relatively easy and simple for teens, not as serious as the world looks today. Was it really a more lighthearted generation? The mood slipped into the 60s, but somewhere along the way, matters got more and more serious, long before the 70s arrived. The parents of today's teenagers were molded by those 2 decades, ancient history to the teens of the 80s, perhaps, but how do they compare to their parents as teens? How do they feel about the questions that loom so ominously? AIDS, nuclear war, unemployment. Our panel here may prove some of the answers are really relevant. This is Sandra Heptich. She's from Kitchener. She's 16 years old and school president, even though she's in grade 11. Scott Barkley is her chum. He's from Ottawa, 18 years old in grade 13. He is a party animal, and Toronto is now very nervous. Zoe Carter is from Toronto. She's 14 years old. She's in grade 10. She likes heavy metal, and she does like her little friend who's hiding under her hair there. That's Boner. Boner's sleeping. Isn't that cute? Stephen Hobey is from Toronto, 18 years old, in grade 13, and he is planning a career in television. Stephen, let's start with you, because I know that you've been really looking at your future. You do have a definite career in mind. But what about your feeling about the education that you've had so far? I've been nervous about it, thinking that Canada particularly was not really up to par. You've been educated in England for the past bit.
Well, I mean, as you know, I've been there for 13 years, and it's completely different over there. Of course, you've got the class system, which is something you really don't have in this country. They're also a little bit backward in their ways. Over here, they have something, the student-teacher relationship, which I think is very important to education. You're able to go up to your teacher, ask them questions. It's a very relaxed atmosphere.
As a colonial, where did you end up in the class system? I'm just curious.
I suppose...
Did you ignore the whole thing, or were you
I like to. I don't agree with it at all, and that's what I like over here. It's racial equality and not much of a class system.
Relative, yes, it is. You're right. So, the teenagers of today are up against some pretty heavy things. We have, well, obviously, we've got potential unemployment. We've got illnesses that we haven't had before. We've got all sorts of restrictions on drugs, rock and roll, and music and everything else. Is there an area that you find particularly confusing or distressing, that bugs you more than anything else in the world?
The parent-child relationship, I think, would be the most difficult for teenagers to deal with. Yeah, I think...
Is it a matter of communication?
Being able to communicate with your parents as easily as you can communicate with your friends, like being able to say, my mom's my best friend, is very difficult for teenagers to be able to do. I think.
And is that a generation? Is it age, do you think? Is it the fact that they're not aware of what's going on?
I think it's the parents are saying, I'm your parent, do this, instead of being able to say, okay, I'm a friend, let's work this out. It's really hard for teenagers to deal with it that way.
And that's been a universal thing, hasn't it? Hasn't through every generation, haven't teenagers had that same thing, and that's still happening now.
I'd like to be able to think it's going to loosen up, though.
Oh, yeah, wouldn't it?
I think I'd like to say that I'm a little different, because my parents have always treated me like an adult.
Yeah.
And I've talked to people like in your position, and you know, they're crying out to be able to talk to their parents. But when they're talking to them, are they really talking to them?
Or being listened to?
Or, exactly. They're being talked down to, and they're not on the same level.
Right.
And I think that's the problem.
It is. Scott, what about you? Do you have a good relationship with your family?
Fairly well. I mean, every family has their own fights, but we get through them all right.
Do you have any specific restrictions placed on you in the teenage life?
Not really.
Not the standard. What about drugs in your world? Is it something that at this point you are ambivalent about, or are your immediate folks down on it? Are your friends down on it? Or?
Well, I know my parents are definitely against it. I mean, whose parents really aren't? But I think there is a lot of drugs going on.
Still?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sandra, what about a few generations ago, there were things called the Black Plague, there were things called the bubonic plague. Now, those are serious plagues, you know. We are now confronted with not just the homosexual community, now the heterosexual community. As I told you, 1 out of 61 children born in New York City at this point is born with AIDS. What do you think your friends are doing or are aware of with that particular?
Well, I think the unfortunate part is people aren't taking it as seriously as they should be. They are being educated, but it seems to be a running joke. Don't touch him, you'll get AIDS, or don't pick that up, you'll get AIDS. And when it gets to the point where you're discriminating people on the basis of AIDS and it gets to be a joke, I think people aren't taking it seriously enough.
Good. Do you know, in fact, how AIDS is transmitted? Do all of you know how AIDS is transmitted? Do your friends know how AIDS is transmitted?
think
So
most of
that
them do,
basic
yeah.
education is working well then.
Yeah,
so,
it is, I
so
think
the
so.
joke thing just comes because jokes always come about
Maybe
things that
people
are...
just don't know how to handle it.
I'm sure that's
It's
part
a
of it.
pretty.
Well, I think what it is that most people don't, it doesn't really hit anybody. Like, people don't understand what the effects of AIDS are until it hits you really close to home.
Exactly, and you get to see it.
Yeah.
And of course, very few teenagers are really involved in it at this point, and hopefully never. But so you don't see a person fading away in front of you in a hospital bed and losing controls and things. No. Okay, but those things do happen. But at least if you feel that you are educated and you know what safe sex is, apparently safe sex is no sex in a situation that might be AIDS involved. But what about sex? Is your generation as relaxed about it as mine was? I was the 60s baby, and so ours was pretty darn free coming into the teenage.
I think it still is, even though people are scared about the AIDS situation and all that. I think it's still exactly the same. People say, okay, I'm scared about it. I realize I've been taught about it and everything, but they still go and do what they do anyway.
They don't think it's going to happen to them.
Exactly.
Nobody thinks it's going to happen to them. And I think also with the media, we're so open about what we show on TV. People sit in their living rooms and they want to be shocked by something on TV, by the violence or the sex, and they need to be entertained to a high degree. And when you see more and more sex, you don't even need an imagination anymore. You just turn on your TV. And that's what I think makes it seem so relaxed. People are much more relaxed with
And
it.
totally
I
encouraged.
think people
encouraged.
are holding their breath, as it were, to wait for a cure. But, you know, you can't do that. I mean, look how hard they've been trying to find a cure for cancer, and they haven't found it. I think that a good thing is to use the media to educate people, use education, so that younger generations can grow up, and they use it as a fact. They all take precautions. And I think that's the only way that we can fight AIDS.
There are a couple of really very, very good commercials, I'm sure more than a couple, that are existent in Canada that still many stations, I hope not this one, refuse to show, which does make me very nervous. Friends of yours and mine, Zoe, are in these commercials about AIDS that help educate, and I'm pleased that friends write in and say, can we have these ads on the TV, because now we don't want to joke anymore. I've done enough fundraisers, as all of us in the community have, for friends who are in trouble. What about unemployment? Do you have any major fears about getting out of this cycle of education and getting a gig?
I tend to think that if you want something and you set your sights on it, you can take the course and get it.
No matter what.
No matter what. I think that if you want something, you can get it. The thing that worries me is a large portion of people my age are apathetic about what they can do. And I think careers and everything is changing so much that you have to say, I want this, and you have to go and get it. Otherwise, you'll just get lost in sort of the flow of things.
Exactly. It's the old saying, you know, you can be whatever you want to be. If you put your mind to it, you can be anything.
But there's still kids now that are saying, well, I don't have to deal with it now. When I get out of school, it won't be a problem. I'll be able to do it when I get out, and they don't think about it now, and they get out, their marks are so low.
Yeah, I think one of the myths is people think that if they go to university, they're guaranteed a job, and that's not so.
It isn't anymore.
No, it really isn't. Think of how many people get out of university and they have Bachelor of Arts degrees. Great. You know, where does that put them? They've really got to set a goal for themselves, and if, as we've been saying, if they really believe in themselves, they can make it.
It has to be that way. You're
Yeah,
absolutely right.
and when you take courses, I think it's important to have a backup plan. Take some kind of courses that you can look at and say, well, I can go this way with it, or I can go the other way with it.
That's right.
That's very sensible. What about what responsibility all of the generations have to the planet? Does this distress any of you, the fact that we're burning off the ozone layer just about as quickly as we can find styrofoam to do it, or that we are cutting down trees and not reforesting the area? Do you have particular pet peeves, Scott? Is there any area that you've been aware of, or Zoe?
Nuclear war, pretty well.
That's the
think
big one.
that's-
Just
yeah.
don't worry about the other stuff. Look at the big one and get that handled first.
I worry about it, and it really scares me, but I kind of realize the fact that it's going to happen if it's going to happen. I mean, there's a lot that we can do, but it's still, if somebody goes in there and pushes the button, there's nothing
But
to change that.
I really doubt that nuclear war is possible, because everybody
To survive or to happen?
to happen.
To happen?
Because both main
Major
major
countries who
countries
hold those powers.
who own them know what the effects are. They've seen them. But what the problem is the nuclear wars that smaller countries are getting.
Exactly. Pakistan has warheads, nuclear warheads. I mean, there's a book, a film, Something Wonderful. If you ever see it, take a look at it. It's called Fail Safe. And that will bring it right directly home to you about how easy a slight mistake. Somebody flies over somebody's land boundary, and the fellow spotter jets are up in the air, and it's just it hangs over you. What future hopes are keeping you inspired and looking up?
As I said, if there's something that I want, I think I can.
Is
I
there?
know I can get it.
Is there?
But it's not so much the worry of whether or not I can do what I want to do. It's what's the right thing for me to do. What am I sort of meant to do? What keeps me going really is probably my parents and the relations I have with the people around me. You know, just someone to say you're good at this, or maybe you could try this. That really keeps you going.
You have supportive people with you.
And knowing that, you know, nuclear war might happen, or you might get AIDS or those things, you can't let that hold you back. You have to live sort of one day at a time.
Scott, what do you want to do?
It keeps changing. There's a lot of things that one day I say, okay, I'll be a photographer. The next day, oh, I want to be an actor. You know, all the things that,
You can do it all.
realistically.
You can do it all, you're right.
And, but then other days, you just say, okay, I'm going to get through this day. Some days are
right.
just rough enough. You got to get through one day.
So, have you got something you special?
I want to be a marine biologist. I don't know if my marks are good enough for that, but I'm going to try really hard.
Stephen?
I'd love to be one.
Well, as you said, I've been in television now for 2 years, so I certainly am setting a goal for myself and really going after it.
And television is not a bad place to do it. It's the
Exactly.
medium is the message.
Right.
All right.
And hopefully do some good with it.
Well, that's terrific. Thank you very much, all four of you, for coming. Wish we could do it again soon. Peter, over to you.
When we come back, medical consultant Dr. John Tyson will be discussing former U.S. President Richard Nixon's other big problem. It's a serious disorder and one we should pay attention to. A bout with phlebitis and how to treat it. Next.